So I'm sure most of you remember the Steubenville rape story from last year, where a bunch of high school athletes sexually assaulted a young woman while she was intoxicated and incapacitated, all the while filming it, tweeting it, spreading it all around social media, and how after that, a majority of the town actually came to the defense of the rapists and assaultists, and many people pointed out correctly at the time that Steubenville really isn't an anomaly here. This type of sexual assault happens, and the cover-ups happen all over America all the time. And we're going to talk about another one of those instances that has come to light recently. There is a report out of the newspaper, the Kansas City Star, by a man named David Hewlett, and the story is gut-wrenching and horrific. Frankly, some people have been covering it a little before this, but I just first heard about it this week. So what happened was two young girls, age 14 and 13, were hanging out in the 14-year-old's bedroom, and they were drinking. They were in Maryville, Missouri, which is about 100 miles north of Kansas City, Missouri. And as I said, they were drinking, and I'm going to stop a moment and state the obvious here. I'm going to say it because, frankly, it's not so obvious to some very, very stupid people. But the obvious point I'm going to say here, which is, of course, if someone's drinking, it doesn't make sexual assault not sexual assault. If alcohol is involved, it doesn't make rape not rape. That's obvious, but to some morons, it's not so obvious, but I'll make sure to say it right here at the top. So, the older girl named Daisy, who's since come forward publicly about what happened, her younger friend has actually not come forward, which is totally fine and great, and, not great, it's horrible what happened to her, but totally acceptable. But Daisy's come forward, and Daisy was a freshman and a cheerleader, and they were hanging out, and Daisy gets a text from a 17-year-old football player named Matthew Barnett. She knew Matthew through school and through her brother, who was also an athlete. Actually, it turned out that Barnett was actually at their house not that long ago with her brother having chili and watching a football game. So they knew each other. Daisy and Matthew text, and eventually the girls slip out of the house, and Barnett picks them up with another boy and drives them all to his house, where a bunch of athletes and kids are hanging out in the basement. When they arrive, reading from the Kansas City Star, Barnett handed her a large glass filled with alcohol. The boys urged her to drink it, and then also a second glass, end quote. And so after that point, that's all that Daisy actually can remember from that night. Her friend, the 13-year-old, actually remembered more. Reading from the Star again, quote, "The younger girl who admitted drinking that night but denied doing so after arriving at Barnett's said she went into a bedroom with the 15-year-old boy who was an acquaintance. He is unidentified because his case was handled by juvenile court, but the sheriff records indicate his interview in which he said, although the girl said no multiple times, he undressed her, put a condom on, and had sex with her." End quote. So the 13-year-old was assaulted. She remembered a lot of it, and that case actually went through juvenile court, but that's sealed because it's juvenile court. Going back to the Star, reading from it again, quote, "When the two returned to the basement's common area, the 13-year-old said Barnett emerged from another room and asked if the girls were ready to go home. She said Daisy was unable to speak coherently and had to be carried from the bedroom." End quote. It's later going to come out that people were carrying her around a good deal. But the 15-year-old, we would later learn that Barnett did in fact sexually assault Daisy. Apparently, a lot of the stuff was actually filmed by iPhones. Again, going back to the Star, more on the story, quote, "Around 2 a.m., the girls were driven back to the Coleman house where the 13-year-old said the boys told her to go on inside, saying they would watch over Daisy outside until she sobered up. As Daisy was carried to the car earlier, she was in fact crying." So they say, again, they tell the younger girl to go on inside, will get Daisy inside after she sobers up. They said they'd watch over her. They watch over her after Barnett had raped her earlier in the night. But the truth, that while they said they were going to watch over her in that little bit of a regard, the truth is they didn't even actually do that. So what's happening right now, this is 2 a.m. on a January night, early morning, and the temperature is less than 30 degrees outside. And according to the Star, these boys dump this young 14-year-old girl on her porch wearing nothing but a t-shirt and sweatpants. When her mother found her on the porch 3 hours later, you heard me, her hair was literally frozen. In the lot next to her, the boys had actually tossed her cell phone and her purse and her shoes. They just threw it out of the car. So not only was she sexually assaulted by one of these boys, he and his friends left her freezing in the freezing cold, to die. As far as they knew, it was 30 degrees when they left her, and it was 22 degrees when her mother eventually found her, as I said, 3 hours later. So her mother took her inside and tried to warm her up, and that's when she discovered bruises. So she calls 911. They instruct her to take her to the hospital. At the hospital, her statement is taken by the police, and initially, everything sort of seems like it's going how a criminal case is supposed to go. In fact, Sheriff Darren White told the Kansas City Star, quote, "Within 4 hours, we had obtained a search warrant for the house and executed that. We had all the suspects in custody and had audio and video confessions." End quote. So it seems they caught them and got them to confess. That's what the actual sheriff says. However, it doesn't end that way. A little more than 2 months later, in March, the charges were mysteriously dropped by the district attorney. That's right, they were dropped, even though they had confessions and evidence. So what exactly happened between January and March, and why were the charges dropped? We really don't know exactly why the charges dropped. We'll talk about that a little more in a minute, but a lot happened between January and March. For starters, Daisy started getting threats. Both in person and online. One of the brothers of the boys who were at Barnett's house tweeted that he hoped Daisy gets what's coming. Yeah, he said that. I mean, how do you respond to that? I mean, this is a woman who was raped, and people are tweeting that she gets what's coming. I don't know what to say to that. Her brothers also started getting threats. Daisy ends up getting suspended from cheerleading. Daisy's brother gets booed by fellow students at a wrestling match. Students tell Daisy's brother that his sister was, quote, asking for it. It goes on at a dance competition. The Kansas City Star reports that a female student had a t-shirt, a handmade t-shirt that literally said, quote, "Matt 1, Daisy 0. I don't know how you respond to depravity like that. But so not only is Daisy harassed, not only is her family, her siblings harassed, Daisy's mother is actually fired from her job at a veterinary clinic. Her boss told her that's because the rape case was, quote, putting stress on everybody in here. And, quote, there's going to be times when we probably have stuff booked and you wouldn't be able to come in, end quote. So she's fired because her daughter was raped and they pursued charges against the rapist. And so eventually in March, when the charges are eventually dropped, people celebrate. There's hashtags celebrating the fact that these charges have been dropped. Student tweets, quote, "F yeah, that's what you get for being a skank," smiley face, end quote. It's disgusting and it's horrible. There's speculation as to why the charges were in fact dropped. Barnett Barnett's grandfather, the Matthew Barnett, his grandfather used to work in law enforcement and for many decades was a local state representative in Missouri. Barnett's grandfather also had direct ties to the district attorney who ultimately dropped the charges. The district attorney's name is Robert Rice. So after trying for justice and being denied, after being turned on by their hometown, being mocked and ridiculed and threatened, the family then decides to move away from the town. They move 40 miles away. And after they're gone, their house is up for sale. And this last August, their house was actually burned to the ground. So far, we don't know what the actual cause was, but generally speaking, houses don't just spontaneously combust, and no one was living there. And what's worse, since moving, Daisy has actually attempted suicide twice. She apparently is cutting herself. She tried to OD on pills. Barnett, the boy who allegedly raped Daisy, is now at the University of Central Missouri, where, according to a recent tweet, he recently said, quote, "If her name begins with A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z, then she wants the D." End quote. That's Matthew Barnett, the one who assaulted Daisy and is now happily living his life at college in Missouri. Look, folks, it's sick and disgusting. Justice has not been served, as is the case in many of these sexual assault cases where the victim is attacked, where the town rallies behind athletes because they're athletes and they can never do no wrong, and football is the best. I mean, the only tiny little bit of hope, and it's just a sliver of hope when it comes to this case, comes from the fact that the group Anonymous, like they did with the Steubenville case, have actually started Operation Maryville. Maryville, again, is the town in Missouri where these horrific crimes took place. And because again, here's the deal. There is supposedly audio and video confessions from the rapists. And since the charges were dropped out of the blue, the evidence has actually been sealed. But as we saw with Steubenville, if the evidence is actually online somewhere, if the evidence exists on some computer somewhere in some city database, I don't know. If the evidence exists, there is a fairly decent chance that Anonymous will be able to find it. And the only hope is that if that evidence is found and publicized and exposed, we have a small, tiny sliver of hope that maybe justice might be served in this horrible case. Because right now, in the town of Maryville, Missouri, they have absolutely no interest in justice. We'll be right back.